As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, a wave of emotions crashed over me. It had been years since I last stepped foot here, yet the memories flooded back as though I had never left. The old oak tree in the front yard stood stoically, its branches casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This visit wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about reclaiming a part of my past that I had left behind. With hesitant steps, I approached the weathered front door, its paint chipped but still holding on to remnants of its former vibrant blue. Inside, the air smelled of aging wood and faint traces of lavender, my mother's favorite scent. The familiar creak of floorboards underfoot echoed through the silent house. Memories flashed before me with every step. The kitchen where we baked cookies on rainy days, the staircase where we pretended each step was a mountain to conquer. I made my way to the back bedroom, where I knew the old oak wardrobe still stood sentinel. Pushing open its heavy doors, I was greeted by a sight that transported me back to my childhood. There they were, my collection of dolls nestled among forgotten sweaters and mothballs. Dust particles danced in the dim light filtering through the window. The dolls, once vibrant with colors now muted by time, seemed to gaze up at me with silent anticipation. I reached out tentatively, brushing away a layer of dust from their porcelain faces. Each doll held a story, a memory of tea parties and whispered secrets. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, I carefully packed each doll into a cardboard box, wrapping them in old blankets and newspaper. As I lifted the last doll, its glass eyes seemed to stare into mine with an eerie intensity, sending a shiver down my spine. Closing the wardrobe doors with a soft click, I carried the box out to my car. I glanced back at the house, feeling a pang of nostalgia and something else, a faint unease that I couldn't quite place. Turning away, I settled into the driver's seat, the box of dolls occupying the passenger seat beside me. With one last look at the house that held so many memories, I started the engine and began the journey to my new home. That night in my new home, sleep eluded me like a fleeting shadow. As I lay in bed, the soft glow of the moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting faint patterns on the walls. I tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position amidst the sea of pillows. The room felt different, as though a subtle shift had occurred since I brought the dolls home. Suddenly, a chill swept over me, raising goosebumps on my arms. I opened my eyes to darkness, the room enveloped in an eerie silence broken only by the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock downstairs. And then, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound, like the whisper of fabric against wood. My heart raced as I turned to glance at the cardboard box beside my bed. There they were, the dolls, wrapped in layers of protection but seeming to stir in the dim moonlight. I blinked, trying to dispel the illusion, but the unease grew stronger. Closing my eyes, I hoped to drift into sleep and escape the creeping anxiety. But sleep did not bring solace that night. Instead, it welcomed a haunting visitor into my dreams. I found myself standing in a familiar yet distorted version of my childhood bedroom. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, the same that I remembered from years ago. The dolls, now freed from their confines, lined the shelves and dresser, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. As I approached, a cold breeze swept through the room, carrying with it a faint scent of lavender. I reached out to touch one of the dolls, but its porcelain face morphed before my eyes, contorting into a grotesque mask with hollow eyes and twisted features. A scream caught in my throat as I stumbled back, knocking over a chair in my panic. The room seemed to close in around me, shadows dancing ominously on the walls. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening echo, trapping me inside with the nightmarish presence. Desperation clawed at my chest as I pounded on the door, pleading for release. But the room remained unchanged, a prison of my own fears and doubts. The dolls watched silently, their expressions frozen in eternal judgment. With a gasp, I jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. The room was bathed in the soft hues of dawn, the nightmare fading like a distant echo. But the terror lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked within the dolls. I sat upright, trembling, my hands clutching the bed sheets as if to anchor myself to reality. I had brought more than memories home. I had invited a malevolent presence into my life. I stood before the bathroom mirror, a place once reserved for mundane routines, now a source of dread. Steam from the hot shower curled around me, distorting the reflection into wavering shapes. As I wiped the condensation away with trembling hands, my own eyes stared back at me, haunted, weary. And then, just for an instant, I saw it. A flicker of movement, a distortion in the glass that wasn't caused by the steam. My reflection seemed to waver, its features melting into a grotesque mask. Hollow eyes, a twisted smile that stretched unnaturally across the face. A scream tore from my throat as I stumbled back, slipping on the wet tiles. The mirror remained unchanged, its surface now clear of any distortion. But the image lingered in my mind, etched with terrifying clarity. I sank to the floor, my heart pounding in my chest. What had I seen? Was it a trick of the light, a product of my overactive imagination? Or was there something more sinister at play, something that had followed me from the old house? Fear coiled in the pit of my stomach as I struggled to make sense of what had happened. The dolls, the nightmares, and now this. Each piece of the puzzle seemed to fit together, forming a picture I was afraid to acknowledge. I began to research feverishly, scouring books and the internet for any clue that could explain the phenomena. Tales of haunted objects, cursed artifacts, they all seemed too fantastical, yet here I was, living a nightmare straight out of those stories. The dolls, I discovered, had once belonged to a distant relative known for dabbling in the occult. Rumors whispered of rituals gone awry, of souls trapped within the delicate porcelain forms. Could it be possible that these dolls harbored something malevolent, something that had latched onto me since their return? Questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and unsettling. With each passing day, my resolve hardened. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The dolls had to go, but how does one dispose of something that might be more than just inanimate objects? I ventured into the attic, where I had stored the box of dolls since that fateful day. Dust motes danced in the faint light filtering through the small window. The air felt heavy with secrets, the weight of generations past pressing down on me. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid of the cardboard box. The dolls lay nestled inside, their faces serene yet somehow accusatory. I hesitated, a wave of guilt washing over me. These were pieces of my childhood, memories of innocence and joy, tarnished by fear and uncertainty. But the longer I hesitated, the stronger the sense of dread became. They had to leave my life, no matter the cost. Gathering my resolve, I began to wrap each doll carefully, preparing them for their final journey away from me. As I worked, a sense of relief washed over me, mingled with a creeping unease. Would disposing of the dolls truly end the nightmare, or had I unwittingly unleashed something irreversible into my life? Determined to uncover the truth behind the dolls, I ventured into the attic once more. The air was thick with dust, swirling in the dim light that filtered through the small, grimy window. Each step I took stirred up clouds of particles, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. In the far corner of the attic, beneath old sheets and forgotten boxes, I discovered a wooden chest. Its surface was marred by age, the brass lock tarnished and brittle. With a deep breath, I forced the lid open, revealing a trove of old papers and photographs. As I sifted through the contents, my hands trembled with anticipation and fear. There were letters, yellowed with age, penned in elegant script that spoke of times long past. One letter in particular caught my eye. It was addressed to my great-grandmother from a woman named Eliza. Dear Margaret, I write to you with a heavy heart and a troubled mind. The dolls you sent have brought an eerie presence into our home. They are unlike any I have seen before, and I fear they are more than mere toys. Please, take them back before it is too late. Eliza. I read the letter several times, my mind racing. Eliza's words echoed my own fears. Could it be that these dolls had a history of bringing misfortune? As I delved deeper into the chest, I found more letters, each recounting strange occurrences and ominous warnings. Beneath the letters lay a stack of photographs. Faded and brittle, they depicted children holding the very same dolls now in my possession. Their smiles seemed forced, their eyes wide with an emotion I could only describe as fear. One photo stood out. A group of children gathered around a woman who looked strikingly familiar. It was my great-grandmother, Margaret, her expression somber and resigned. but it was the journal that truly chilled me to the bone. Bound in cracked leather, it contained detailed entries about the dolls. Margaret had meticulously documented the strange events surrounding them, from unexplained noises to terrifying visions. One entry caught my eye. June 12th, 1923. The dolls have once again moved on their own. I found them in the parlor, arranged as if they were having a tea party. Eliza is right. There is something unnatural about them. They seem to watch and listen, waiting for something. I must find a way to rid us of them before they bring more harm. The words sent shivers down my spine. Margaret had tried to get rid of the dolls, just as I was now. But if she had failed, what hope did I have? The more I read, the clearer it became that these dolls were far from ordinary. They carried a dark history, one that spanned generations. With growing dread, I realized that bringing the dolls into my home had awakened whatever malevolent force lay within them. I needed to act, and quickly. But how do you fight something so deeply rooted in the past, something that defies explanation? I gathered the letters, photographs, and journal, my resolve hardening with each passing moment. This was no longer just about my fear, it was about breaking a cycle that had haunted my family for decades. The dolls had to be dealt with once and for all. The days that followed my discovery in the attic were fraught with a growing sense of dread. I'd hoped that uncovering the truth about the dolls would bring some measure of peace, but instead, it seemed to have intensified their presence. The once innocuous toys now felt like a sinister force lurking in the shadows. The first sign came one evening as I was preparing dinner. The kitchen, usually a place of comfort and warmth, felt stiflingly oppressive. I turned my back for just a moment, and when I looked again, the dolls were no longer in their box by the door. They were perched on the counter, arranged in a circle, their glassy eyes fixed on me. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps I had moved them without realizing it, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Nights became a torment. I would wake to the sound of soft footsteps or the faint rustling of fabric. The shadows in my room seemed to shift and writhe, taking on shapes that shouldn't be there. I lay paralyzed in bed, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. One night, I gathered the courage to get up and investigate. As I flicked on the hallway light, I saw them, the dolls, lined up outside my bedroom door as if waiting for me. Panic surged through me and I slammed the door shut, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Each morning brought new horrors. The dolls appeared in different rooms, adopting new poses that seemed disturbingly lifelike. One was found seated at the dining table, another reclined on the living room sofa, and yet another stood by the window, looking out into the yard as if anticipating something. Objects around the house began to break or disappear. A shattered vase here, a missing set of keys there. It felt like a siege, the dolls gradually tightening their grip on my sanity. The final straw came when I discovered a doll in my bed, nestled under the covers as if it had been sleeping beside me. I screamed and flung it across the room, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. The sense of violation was overwhelming. They weren't just haunting my home, they were invading my personal space, my sanctuary. Desperation drove me to a decision. I couldn't live like this, constantly on edge, fearing the next inexplicable event. I had to get rid of the dolls. It didn't matter how difficult or dangerous it might be. They had to go. I spent the next few hours researching how to dispose of potentially cursed objects. Burning them seemed risky, and simply discarding them felt insufficient. I needed a way to ensure they couldn't return or harm anyone else. My search led me to an old article about a distant church that specialized in dealing with cursed artifacts. It was a long shot, but it was the best option I had. I packed the dolls carefully, wrapping them in thick blankets and placing them in a sturdy box. The house was eerily silent as I worked, the oppressive atmosphere almost palpable. With the box sealed and ready, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe this would finally bring an end to the nightmare. As I loaded the box into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the dolls were aware of my intentions. Their eyes seemed to follow me, and a chill ran down my spine. I ignored it, determined to see this through. I started the engine and drove away, leaving behind the house that had become a battleground. I woke up with a steely resolve to rid myself of the dolls. The oppressive atmosphere of my home had become unbearable. each day more suffocating than the last. I couldn't live with the constant fear and uncertainty, the dread of what might happen next. I loaded the box of dolls into the trunk of my car, their weight somehow feeling heavier than before. As I drove towards the distant church I had read about, the road ahead seemed interminable. Every bump and jolt made me glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see one of the dolls staring back at me. Arriving at the church, I was met by an elderly priest who listened patiently as I recounted my harrowing experience. He didn't seem surprised, which both comforted and unnerved me. He agreed to take the dolls, promising they would be sealed away in a place where they could no longer cause harm. Relief washed over me as I left the church. The drive back home felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. Yet, a nagging fear lingered. Would this really be the end, or was it merely the calm before another storm? Back home, the house seemed almost serene, the oppressive weight that had hung over it now gone. The nights were quieter, the strange noises ceased, and I no longer felt the chilling sensation of being watched. Seeking answers and solace, I turned to the library and the internet. I scoured books on mysticism and the occult, searching for any mention of cursed dolls or haunted objects. Online forums and websites were filled with tales of similar experiences, each more terrifying than the last. The more I read, the more I realized that I had been dealing with something far beyond my comprehension. One evening, as I pored over yet another ancient text, I stumbled upon a passage that sent shivers down my spine. It described a ritual in which spirits could be bound to objects, trapped within them for eternity. The dolls, it seemed, had been vessels for such spirits, a malevolent force that had latched onto my family for generations. I understood now why the dolls had such a powerful effect, why they had seemed almost alive. They weren't just cursed objects. They were prisons for tortured souls, bound by dark magic to inflict their torment on the living. Despite the strange occurrences having ceased, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The house was calm, but my soul was not. I began to seek comfort in prayer and meditation, hoping to find some semblance of peace. Each night, I prayed for protection, for the strength to move past the trauma the dolls had inflicted. Slowly, a sense of calm began to return to my life. The nightmares faded, and I found myself sleeping through the night without waking in terror. Yet the memory of the dolls remained, a dark shadow on the edges of my consciousness. I knew that what I had faced was beyond rational explanation, a brush with the supernatural that had left an indelible mark on my soul. The dolls were gone, but their presence had forever altered my understanding of the world. As the days turned into weeks, I found a fragile peace. I continued my research, driven by a need to understand the dark forces I'd encountered. And while I hoped never to face such horrors again, I knew that I was better prepared, armed with knowledge and a newfound faith to protect me from whatever might come. Driving back to my childhood home felt like stepping into a time machine. I was returning not just to a place, but to a part of my life that held the key to the mystery of the dolls. As I parked in front of the house, I took a deep breath. I stepped inside and was immediately greeted by the scent of aged wood and the faint mustiness of a place long lived in. I made my way to the attic, the place where the dolls had been stored for years. The air was thick with dust, and each step I took stirred up old memories. I found the boxes where the dolls had been kept, now empty, but still carrying an eerie presence. I spent hours sifting through old letters, photographs, and journals. They were gifts from a mysterious woman named Eliza, given to my great-grandmother Margaret. The dolls were vessels for malevolent spirits, trapped by a man named Samuel, an occultist who had sought to control their power. My search led me to the local library, where I delved into town records and old newspapers. There, I found an article about Samuel and his house on the outskirts of town, a place shrouded in dark legends. I drove to Samuel's old house, now a crumbling ruin overtaken by nature. In the basement, I found a hidden compartment filled with books and artifacts. Among them was a small ornate box containing letters and documents that detailed Samuel's experiments and the creation of the dolls. Suddenly, a noise startled me. Turning around, I saw an elderly woman standing in the doorway. She introduced herself as Eliza's granddaughter and told me she had been expecting someone to come seeking the truth. She confirmed the dark history of the dolls and explained that Samuel's own creations had turned against him, leading to his mysterious disappearance. We talked for hours, and she provided me with the final pieces of the puzzle. The dolls were cursed objects, vessels for tortured souls bound by dark magic. She gave me a small amulet, a protective charm meant to ward off evil spirits, something that had been in her family for generations. As I left Samuel's house, I felt a sense of closure. I had uncovered the dark secrets of the dolls, but more importantly, I had faced my fears and survived. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but it had also been a path to understanding and growth.